everyone. I want to welcome you to the Women at the Top podcast. My name is Regina Barr, and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I will be your host today. I am so excited for you all to be here. For those of you who haven't been with us before, we are a community of like-minded women, those who want to help aspiring women lead. And we do that through training, connections, and by providing information. So joining me today is Kimberly Layne, author of Connections Change Everything, How Smart Leaders Connect Through Better Conversations. And I think we can all have better conversations. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Kimberly. Kimberly of Kimberly Connection Company is a leadership development consultant, an employee engagement partner, host of the Power of Connection and Biz show on YouTube, as well as a professional speaker. So she's got quite a resume for all of us today. She's also the author of her book, which we'll be talking about, Connections Change Everything. Not sure I'm getting the best copy of that in there, but there you have it. I want to tell you a little bit about her professional background as well. As a previous top sales executive for Fortune 100 companies such as Boston Scientific, United Healthcare, and Genpact, she has witnessed the power of relationships and connections, not only in driving sales, but also in motivating employees and building and retaining relationships with employees. So when she saw how poor leadership affects our happiness and productivity at work, she went to work to write this book. She has a BBA from Kent State University Honors College and an MBA from John Carroll University, graduating summa cum laude in both. She's also pursuing a PhD in psychology, which always makes me a little nervous when I'm doing an interview, and that's from Pepperdine. And she is an internationally certified professional coach. In addition to her own company, as if she needed any more clout, the Kimberly Connection Company, she is also on the executive Next Practices Advisory Board and is a practice leader for NextWorks Strategies. On a personal note, she loves playing tennis. She has an adorable Shih Tzu named Happy Sammy. And she's an avid baker of liquor-infused Italian mascarpone cheesecakes. So I would love to learn more about that. And I wish we were in person because I would have begged you to bring one. So with that, welcome to our podcast today, Kimberly.
Thank you so much, Regina. It's really a joy to be here and to personally connect with you and spend some time today just talking about connections all over the place. So it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, and so important right now in particular, probably more important than any of us could have imagined, So let's go ahead and get started. And I do like to start with sort of the backstory on the book. So I'll just hold up the cover here. Connections Change Everything. So why did you decide to write this book now?
Great question. As always, there's always a backstory, right? I've always wanted to write a book ever since I can remember. One, because I have a personal story, which you'll read in chapter 1. I don't want to give it away, but just my own personal experience of being broken off from my family, and not more so emotionally, not physically. I was still with them, but just emotionally, I was broken off from them. And it really took me till after 36 to really fight back for that relationship and reconnect with my family, and from a personal and emotional level. So that was really the one thing, that the number one thing inspiring me. Number two, that really prompted me to actually start writing it, was my own experience with poor leadership and seeing the ramifications on myself and other people with poor leadership. And just in today's world, I just feel like it's unacceptable. And then the third piece is just my frustration with, and we'll get to this, I know, later in the conversation, of the power of technology, but it's wonderful. There's great power in technology, but it's also a crutch, I think. And we're not really truly leading when we're only using digital technology to communicate, and even on our personal relationships. So the need to really bring back humanity and human connection in our relationships, as opposed to just relying only on digital interaction, was the third reason why I wrote the book. So all three you're going to find in the book as well. So,
well, I can't help chuckling with you on the digital connection, because I always have a challenge with my husband getting things scheduled on his calendar. So I got so frustrated one day, I sent him a meeting invite and he got so mad. And I said, you know what? Then when I ask you, you need to help me by responding. When you tell me like you'll get back to me, I expect you to get back to me. So
Right.
if not, I will continue to send meeting invites if that works better for you. And so anyway, we do a combination of both. He's kind of gotten used to it. And, and the beauty of that, it gets it right on his calendar at the right time. So I'm just chuckling because I think sometimes, one party, I'm an extrovert, I will over rely on communicating in person. He's a little more introverted, and I know that about him, and he's over relying. So I'm interested to hear your take on that, because not only can what you tell us help us in our work relationships, can also help us in our home relationships. So I think
For
that's really
sure.
important. So
Yeah.
I want to follow up with another question. And over the past several weeks and months here at Women at the Top podcast, we've been talking a lot about the importance of emotional intelligence. And your background, my gosh, clearly, and the work that you're doing, really focusing on connections, which is what I think emotional intelligence is all about, is so critical. So tell us, why is connection so important to you and the work you do, as well as how you feel that that relates to emotional intelligence?
Yes. So again, it goes, all this is motivated by my own personal story of feeling disconnected and knowing what that feels like. Right. So, and seeing today, we've got a larger portion of millennials in the workforce. So 2025, there'll be 75% of millennials in the workforce who are only really communicating digitally. And their incidence of suicide is extremely high. There's a lot of studies by Gallup, by Forbes, Psychology Today, demonstrating that those heavy social media users are more inclined to feel isolated, disconnected,
Right.
and alone. So, um,
More
so
connected, but more isolated, right?
more digitally connected, but
Mm-hmm.
more emotionally isolated. So,
Correct.
I and knowing just how wonderful you feel when you truly feel connected and valued, and amongst others that you feel safe with, can communicate, can talk about things, can be vulnerable with, is so important. So as a leader, leadership today is no longer just about a logical analytical data plot of getting a sales revenue number or getting a project plan completed and a customer implemented. It's so much more than that. If you as a leader are not aware of how your people feel, and I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
COVID did, as a leader, if you were decent, and you were getting your project plans done, your sales quotas done from your team, et
Yeah.
cetera, your weekly meetings, blah blah blah, you're a decent manager. But then
Mm-hmm.
when COVID hit, there became a huge gap between those good leaders and those that were extremely poor, because if you didn't have a personal relationship or in tune with your people and they could trust you, you are now seeing them possibly stressed out, burnout, working
Right.
from home. And if you can't reach through that computer screen or pick up the phone and call them and really have a personal conversation about how you doing, how's it working for you, you seem really stressed, what's going on, your anxiety level, how is all that stuff going? And you can't just have those conversations out of the blue if you don't already have a personal relationship. So
Right.
emotional intelligence is really a big part of being able to connect with people. You have to have awareness of how you're coming across, but you also have to have awareness of how other people are feeling, have empathy for that, and be able to use the right language that they feel trusting enough to communicate what's going on in their life. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's interesting because those connections are really critical. So, for example, I know, especially with your corporate background, that, you know, I think right now, and even I've seen this in my business, I'm doing business with people that I have the relationship with. It's a little bit harder when I'm trying to meet people and connect. Even though I'm comfortable in Zoom, right? It's harder to make that really personal connection. It can help in a challenging environment, but it does make it a lot harder. So I find that it is a lot easier for me to do work, and I'm sure you're finding this, and perhaps some of those watching and listening in today are finding the same thing, if they're in sales or customer facing type of positions in their companies. So do you find that to be the case, that those existing relationships have almost become more solidified, and then the ones that perhaps are a little bit more on the periphery are, kind of on the outs even almost?
Yeah, it's hard to take a digital environment where you're interacting this way, because the thing with digital interaction, that's including a text. I mean, how many times have we misinterpreted a text because there's no emotion attached to it unless it's an emoji. So
Right.
when I'm working with teams and helping educate them on how to bring, empathy or EQ into their workplace and build their own EQ skills, is helping them understand that, we do so much logic, analytical stuff when we're working digitally, email, et cetera, text, et cetera. But when you're picking up the phone, that is now an emotional connection, because you hear the tone of somebody's voice. You feel whether they're happy or they're sad. Same thing
Mhm.
with an in-person connection. It's or an in-person meeting. That is an emotional exchange, and people react. People buy on emotion. People will feel trustworthy of you based on emotion, not on
Mhm.
facts and logic. And so that's why, additionally, that emotional intelligence is so important, is because your goal as a leader somehow is to bring that emotion back into that relationship and navigate around, or through that whole digital piece of it, to create that emotion. So
Yeah.
it's there's a lot of pieces, parts. It's studies showing as AI gets more developed in the workplace, it's going to take away 70% of really the tasks of a manager, of a leader. So what's left, right? It's the relationship piece. It's
Exactly.
the soft skill piece. It's the being able to communicate. It's the being able to motivate. It's the being to really truly perceive what's going on with an employee and to coach them through their challenges or their stress or their difficulties. It's going to be really I think a different environment, and you're going to have some psychology skills in there to, in an essence, because you have to be able to be in tune with what's going on from a, anxiety or stress. You really have to be able to read people. It's going to be interesting what's going on in
Yes, it will. And
the decade here.
God help us, because I think there are a lot of managers and leaders and bosses who are lacking in that department. They're more the bull in the china shop, just get it done kind of people. And
Right.
the people that have these relational skills will be in high demand, to your point, because more and more we are going to be relying on technology. The fundamental shape of how we work together has changed, and that leads me to my next question, regarding, we've seen so many changes in the workplace over the last year, and I think a lot of those will not go away. This clearly has impacted how leadership is connecting with employees. So, from your perspective, how has the pandemic changed your message from when you first published the book, which ironically was right before the pandemic?
Correct.
What timing, right?
Right. I thought, oh my gosh, I literally just launched it like February 26th, and then literally, March 16th, the pandemic hits, right? And I'm thinking, great. But I'm gonna get some water here. I think what it's done is everybody has felt disconnected during this time period. There is not one person I have talked to, I don't care who you are, that has not felt
Hmm.
disconnected.
Here, here. Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
alone or isolated, and felt that anxiety as a result of COVID. And so number one, I can really pull on that emotion and get people feeling that by just bringing up certain topics, right? And so everybody understands when I'm talking about disconnection, and knows what it feels like, in order then to be able to reverse that, and what does it feel like to be connected. So I think that's one big difference. And then also, because so many, like we talked about in the beginning, leaders are now having to manage through virtual Zoom meetings, et cetera, which is so difficult in creating that emotion. Their skills have to be upped, right? They have to really develop their soft skills where they got away with it before. So all my messages in my book about sharing your personal story, being vulnerable, picking up the phone to call somebody and hear the voice versus using it text, finding some way to connect with them, share a cup of coffee over Zoom, have wine
Yes,
tasting over Zoom. All these bonding shared experiences become even more necessary because we're also remote and we're all truly craving connection. So, initially, like you mentioned, I thought it really killed my opportunity, but it's really has accelerated it. And there's just
that's great.
such a huge need and a realization from organizations that we've got to pull our people in somehow. How can we do that? And so I'm loving that. One thing I wanted to go touch back on, so I know we're talking about women at the top.
Yes.
I do a presentation that I really love doing to women's groups. It's called Women Let Your Lioness Roar. And it's really about we as women have natural skills as leaders. This is our perfect
Mhm.
time to be putting ourselves out there for leadership roles, whether it be on the board or, a C-suite executive, because we do have those natural leadership skills of being empathetic, of being sensitive to people, of
Mhm.
caring, of motivating people. And I just think, we can capture in on this opportunity. And I believe we're because of the need for more soft skills, because of the need of more EQ, it's a prime time for women to start,
To take
putting
the
themselves
lead.
out there to take
Yes.
the lead. And I'm really here
Mhm.
to help them get there. And to just, because I think sometimes we write our own tapes and they're not the best tapes we can have. And women are their own mental enemies. And I just really, we all have that. I'm just as much as guilty as that. And I
Right.
just really want women to get out of their own way. And that talk that I give is really about how can we get out of our own way, and the things that we say to ourselves, and even the words we use to get to
Yes.
the position. So I wanted to make sure.
Our language
Yeah,
we need to change,
correct.
and what's interesting is um, women are far more relational, less transactional, and
Yeah,
this is a relational time that we're in,
right.
not in the the business of getting transactions. The transactions will come, but the relational piece has to come first. So I completely agree that we women are well positioned. It's like I like to say, it's an opportunity for us to leverage or lose, and I'm hoping that women will choose to leverage that. So
Bingo. Yes.
I want to shift a little to another area, another topic that you talk about in your book, and it's the topic of on the cost of holding on to secrets. And I always feel like when what we hold on to, we manifest. So tell us a little bit more about what that means and how that can impact us.
Yes, yeah. So, like I mentioned, in the first chapter of my book, I tell my personal story, and that's what disconnected me from my family. I held a secret for virtually 36 years, and even though my family was loving and nurturing and whatever, I just held onto that secret so tight in order to protect somebody else, right? And I think we all of us, have similar stories of something that we kept a secret, whether it's, you know gender, sexuality, whatever, something, right? And it could be, it could be even, that's why affairs are so detrimental to relationships, because you're keeping a secret from your partner, and there is no way to cut off your arm in a certain relationship and be able to turn around and hug somebody over here, because you're carrying that separation with you. So my point
Mhm.
being is, when you're holding on to a secret, it there's two things that happen. One, you're constantly bearing it, you're constantly conscious of making sure that doesn't come up, plus all the guilt that goes around with it, right? So it takes a lot of energy to keep it hidden and to prevent yourself from mentioning anything around that would create questions, right? Plus the guilt that goes with it. So the point being is, you're only really relating to other people with the other 70% of yourself, the good stuff in your opinion, right? Because you think the
Mhm.
secret's the bad stuff. So you're only relating on the 70% of yourself, the other 30% is bad. But what you find out as you get older and you reveal your secret, that secret or vulnerability is your most relatable part of you. That is the most connecting part of you, because you're sharing your story only relates better to somebody else, and you become human, and that emotion gets evoked, and that connection and trust gets stronger. So it's actually an asset, but I think so many of us feel it's something that people don't want to hear. I start every chapter with the quote, and this one in particular is by Ellen DeGeneres. She says, everybody has a chapter in their book that they don't want to read out loud. What's yours? So
That's a great quote.
yeah, so we
Yeah.
all have a story, right? And your power is in your story, especially we
Yeah.
women, so your power is in your story. Your most vulnerable part of you is your most relatable part of you. And why hide that? Why hide that from other people? Because it's a story that needs to get out, and it's a story that connects you to others, and it makes you a better leader. It makes you a better person. So
It's
that,
interesting. Right now, I'm working with a team, and the book they chose, we're using a book. It's Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, and she
yes,
focuses a lot on vulnerability. And I find it very fascinating when I have conversations around vulnerability with men versus women, because men always feel like it's like they got to bare their soul, and
right,
it's like a floodgate of they have to dump everything out. No, there's a way to be vulnerable without like
right,
just like splattering your whole private life, on the table. So it's just really fascinating to me that we women kind of get it
right.
and the guys don't. So anyway, so there's also an opportunity because, in the workplace, we work with men and women, and we also manage men and women. So we also need to do our part to help our guys be a little bit more vulnerable too, and to see that it's going to help them, not hinder them, that it can be an asset, not a deficit. So I think that's fabulous. So I want to talk a little bit about, we started to talk a little bit earlier about this remote work environment. And when you think about leaders who are trying to lead in this virtual environment, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 skills that leaders need to be successful in the current environment?
Great question. There's three things that I really coach on. It's consciousness, communication, and compassion. So consciousness meaning you have to be conscious enough about yourself, very self-aware about how you're feeling in this situation. It's a great opportunity to be vulnerable as a leader because there's no answers. We've not been through a COVID pandemic before. So you're feeling just as anxious as your team is. And so to be able to communicate that is a huge piece as far as creating trust within your relationship. But consciousness, how you feel, and conscious how your team is feeling. So you have to have sensitivity to the emotions of others, right?
Mhm.
The second piece of it would be communication. How good is your communication and the words you choose to create a safe, trusting environment where your employees are going to want to share what's going on? Just by blatantly ask them, what's going on, or how you feeling today. If you don't already have that trusted communication with them, by just asking them the question does not necessarily mean that they're going to divulge and you're going to have this
Right.
wonderful conversation. So you have to be very conscious of your communication, and that communication has to be vulnerable on your part, very much about listening, and then frequent. And then the final piece would be compassion, that really compassion to care. They have to feel and know that you care. So when you're sensitive enough to and conscious enough to pick up the phone and you say, "Hey, Regina, you were kind of absent emotionally, it seemed, on that phone call, and I'm a little concerned about you. How are things going? You seem withdrawn on that phone call. You're not, your normal bubbly self on our team meeting today. And I just want to just check in and make sure everything's going okay. What's going on?" And then be able to sit and listen. So those are the three things: consciousness, communication, and compassion, I would suggest.
Yeah, I love those. I think all are critically important and build on each other. So thank you for sharing that. So I want to ask about something you talk about in chapter 7 of your book, and you talk about corrected, connected course. So tell our viewers, what does this mean, and why it's important?
So at the end of every chapter, I have what's called a connection correction. And there are 16 connection corrections that you can find in this chapter 7. And they're basically just one line statements. And you can literally rip out the 2 pages and frame that list and leave it in your office. It was really designed to be a reference for you on a daily basis, because none of these are rocket science, but
Hmm.
they are things that do bring connection, that do remind us that we are human. And for example, one would be choose human connection over digital interaction. So at least you're conscious to say, you know what, I was going to send a text to Regina this morning, but you know what? I really feel like I want to talk about something important. Bounce a new idea off of her, really ask how she's doing. I'm going to pick up the phone and call her, right? Or, in the days when we had the office, instead of sending an email, get up out of your chair and walk down the hallway. And meanwhile, you ran into Joe, who just announced that, his daughter just had a baby. Oh my gosh, where you would not have known that if you were stuck in your office, right?
Right.
And then another one would be about, I'm really big about listening skills. So there's a chapter devoted to BEE, like the B. Be present is the first part about that. E is eye contact, that really looking into people's eyes. That's the first sign of validation of us as
Yes.
children, that we're valued by our mother or our father. So eye contact is so important. I mean, you know how it feels when you're talking to somebody and they're looking on their phone and they're not looking in
Yes.
your eyes. You just feel so humiliated, right? So and then E is just that emotional exchange. So there's 16 kind of connected correction
Yeah.
courses, that tips that people can just consciously look at, and a dental reminder, and maybe you adopt one once a week. But it's things
That's
that we
great.
do in our day-to-day that can easily be embraced in order to build more connection. Again, like we talked about, this isn't just for professional, this is stuff you can do on a daily basis that you'll see the change in your own relationships, which I'm an advocate for.
So it's interesting. The one that I should say resonated with me was the one on wellness opportunities. And I think that's a statement about, where I'm at personally and trying to incorporate different things to get me moving, because was a huge piece of isolation for me, because I would go to the gym, I would do walk and talks with people. I didn't just do lunch. I did a lot of coffee. So even in my community, none of the coffee shops where you can sit
Right,
down are open. Some of the restaurants are, but then they put limitation on table
right.
time. So I don't know if you have any of that in your
Yeah.
community. So
Yep.
that was really resonating with me. And it talked about like yoga and some other things that I don't typically do, but I have been trying to incorporate more into my day to day, just stretching and moving, because we are not, or at least I'm used to coming and going. So you have a lot of natural movement
Right,
in
right,
addition to what I might schedule, right? So I'm
right.
trying to find more ways, little ways throughout my day to incorporate that. So that was my favorite, just because it happened to resonate with me where I am. But there's a lot of great ideas. So for those listening in, be sure to check out chapter 7. So we are actually winding down on our time, and I always like to ask, and maybe you were already alluding to some of this in the prior question. I always ask, what would be, there's only one thing that you absolutely positively wanted folks to walk away from our conversation today? What might that be?
Because this is focused on women at the top, and having had my own struggles, and just coming in my own and growing up and getting my own confidence and achieving my dreams and things of that sort, your best connection, your most important connection, is the one you have with yourself. Because if you're not connected to yourself and practicing self-care and loving yourself and giving yourself a break and not beating yourself up and rewriting your tapes to be positive and affirming, you're sacrificing really how wonderful your other relationships can be, because your life can be really beautiful. And when you start with a good connection with yourself, it only makes the rest of your connections amazing. So that's really important, and I help women do that. So
I think that's great advice, because I think we suffer from chronic perfectionism and we beat
yeah,
ourselves up a lot, when I think most women that are in my circle, they're amazing,
correct.
juggling so many different things and taking things in stride. Case in point, this past year. So,
Right.
with that, that concludes our interview with Kimberly Layne. I want to say thank you so much for being with us here today. And for those of you who would like to learn more about her programs, you can learn more at kimberly-layne.com. And I'll spell that Kimberly-layne.com. So, again, thanks for being here, Kimberly. And don't forget to check out reginabarr.com, where you can learn more about our upcoming episodes and podcasts and other events that we're hosting. With that, I want to say thank you all for being here and have a wonderful day.